Kia ora and welcome everyone to our extraordinary council meeting, the first virtual council meeting. So we'll see how we go. But yeah, thank you and welcome to the members of the public here who are here or watching us live as well. Just to start us off with opening formalities, Councillor Briggs, would you like to do a karakia for us?
Mi noi tātou, kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa pauna mu te moana, he huarahi mā tātou I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai. Tātou ia tātou katoa. Hui e, tāu ki e.
Thank you, Councillor Briggs. Just first off, we have apologies. So I've received an apology from Councillor Shaw. I've moved that we accept that apology. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Brown, thank you. All those in favour say aye.
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 Those against, no. I declare that carried. Thank you. Now we move into public comment. And first we have Mr. Sherlaw, who is speaking on item 8 of the agenda. You have 3 minutes.
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Yep.
Thanks. Thank you.
Right. Okay. I'm speaking in support of a zero rates increase for this year. This is a time when wide-reaching change is needed from everyone, including the council. Today, we've had projections that 30% of businesses could close as a result of this COVID-19 crisis, and many families throughout the country will have their jobs lost and no income. There has never been a more compelling time for this council to rein in its costs and not increase rates. Turning to the report, paragraph 30 says that current service levels could not be maintained with a zero rates increase. No mention whatsoever of what services couldn't be maintained nor how they may be impacted. A comparison of the rates dollars in the 2020 and 21 budgets in last year's annual plan demonstrates that this contention is somewhat overstated. Budgeted rates in the 1920 year in last year's annual plan were $108.1 million. The 2021 forecast rates were $111.9 million, and that's all based on the rolling LTP. So an increase between 2020 and 2021 of $3.8 million. Expenditure in 2020 in that same document, 186.7 million in 2020 and 185.8 million in 2021, so virtually the same. All that is needed for a zero rates increase this year is a $3.8 million reduction in expenditure. That's insignificant and does not and should not trigger an amendment to the LTP. A zero rates increase will mean that council is unable to do everything it wants this year, but that's a far cry from claiming significant reductions in service levels. An LTP isn't required to be rigidly adhered to. Minor variations occur every year, and a $3.8 million expenditure reduction is certainly minor. And I would suggest that this is the prudent thing to do when you've got Wainuiomata. They were facing a 14% rates increase under a 3.8% rates increase. This could chop it down to possibly around 10% for those communities. I mean, not ideal, but at least the council will have done everything it could to mitigate such hefty rates increases for some of the lower socioeconomic communities in our city. So I think that's the prudent course of action to take today. Go out with adopt a zero rates increase. You don't need to do any consultation at all. You can just rubber stamp it as an insignificant change to the LTP that's currently in place. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Max. Is there any quick questions of Mr. Sherlaw? Councillor Milne.
Yes, thank you. Max, are you aware that some other councils around the country have already gone down a zero rates increase, and have any of them sought the need to trigger a special LTP amendment?
Well, I know that Christchurch, a fairly significant sized city, has done exactly that with no need to trigger an LTP amendment. I don't know others. There are others. The Waikato Regional Council, I think, they did the same thing and they've just adopted it. So, you know, I've not seen any information or reports that have indicated that implementing a zero rates increase triggers an LTP amendment. So, no, I don't believe so.
Is there other questions? Councillor Dyer?
Yeah, just a quick question, Max. If we talk to our council officers when that's the time, and they tell us that it is triggered, and we would need to actually heavily consult to do a zero rates freeze, do you think that would still be the best option given the current situation we're in with lockdown and maybe not being able to effectively consult with our community?
Well, I'd be interested to see what their basis for the significance is, because I mean, if there's no the significance policy, and I've got it up on screen now, it says that there's got to be a sort of major variation in between what's said in the LTP and what you're proposing to do. It talks about a 10% increase in capital expenditure. Well, that's not going to happen. Or a 5% increase in expenditure. Well, that's not going to happen either. But I agree, it's not desirable to consult, but I do not believe that significance is triggered with a zero rates increase this year.
Okay, we've just got a couple of other quick questions. Andy, then, sorry, Councillor Mitchell, then Councillor Hislop.
Oh, Max, I received, and I assume all councillors around the country received an email on the 1st of April from the taxpayers, which was actually calling for rates freezes across the country, but also acknowledged that rates are a tool, and I'll quote it to you, a tool that does not reflect a household or business's ability to pay. And you mentioned that a lot of people will be losing jobs and household income as a result of COVID-19, but there are a lot of people that won't. And I wonder if you think that freezing rates is actually offering rates relief to people who don't need it.
Well, it's not. No, it's not offering rates relief at all. Rates relief is when you don't pay the rates full stop. It's not about rates increases. It's about being given, not being allowed to not pay at all. They're two quite different situations that you're talking about.
Okay.
Councillor Hislop, final one.
Thank you, Max. You mentioned that a zero rates increase would result in a necessity to save approximately, was it 3.8 million?
3.8 million, yes.
So I would like to ask you, if you were on, on the council, where would you see that 3.8 million saving coming from, please?
Right. I've got a list here. I have previously sent you a list of savings, but I've got some more here. Community engagement research, 450,000, don't need it. Marae funding, 200,000, scrap it. Free ambulance, 100,000, scrap it. Arts funding, 93,000. CFT grant, 250,000. Events, 479,000. Love Wainuiamata, 100,000. Waste minimisation, 301,000. Environmental sustainability projects, 116,000. Social development projects, 100,000. And I think it would look very good if you followed Wellington's advice and took a 10% salary reduction as well. So that's getting close to the $3.8 million that could be saved without too much trouble at all.
Okay, thank you, Max. I mean, my quick numbers there would say there would still be some space to go between that and to get to 3.8 million. And I mean, the advice from officers, we'll certainly ask them. We've obviously got that covered in the report, but thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Okay, next speaker, a member of the public, Helen Swales, representing the Jackson Street program and speaking on item 8.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this virtual meeting. There are a couple of things that we would like to put on the table for the members or for the council to take on board, and it's with regard to, yes, we do understand that we're in times that are uncharted, that we need to look prudently at rates and rates relief. Now, we're quite comfortable with the officer's recommendation of option 2, but what we would like to do is put some amendments or make some suggestions around those. One of our people, or actually a few of our building owners, thought that the threshold of $1 million was pretty low, considering that there are a number of different tenancies that are in there, that we would like you to look at lifting that to $1.5 million as a threshold. We also know that with regard to the reductions that we would like, or the deferral or postponement, is that under legislation, you have to do the capital value that has been increased, and that's non-negotiable. We also appreciate that in order for the council to reactivate the economy, you're going to have to look at some sort of rates increase. What we would like you to look at is probably something around CPI, which keeps us in pace with what's happening. It's better than a 0% because we know that there needs to be some sort of buffer or threshold if we're expecting any council to kickstart the economy when we come out of the place that we're in. So those amendments are some that we would like you to have a look at with regard to the rates of referral. We'd also like to go to attachment 3, which is on page 28, and it's around the eligibility on it, if you'd like to go to that page. And it's really, once again, reinforcing that rateable value of the properties and that it could be greater than $1 million. So that's the point that we'd actually like to raise and ask you to think about. The other thing that we'd also like you to think about is that under the current legislation that the government is doing, there are clauses in the ADLS lease where some of our building owners and landlords are actually giving rates or rent release to the businesses that have that in their clause, their lease clause, and they are activating it, and they will continue to activate while they're in the lockdown. Jackson Street program is known regionally for the hospitality industry, and I think there's no debate that the hospitality industry is the one that's taken the biggest knock here. And then the next to that would be the personal beauty, the one-on-one closeness. So with that in mind, knowing that the margins in those businesses are really quite tight, we know that our landlords want to keep those people in their occupancy. They've had a good track record and that they have continued to be there. But whilst our landlords do look at giving them some sort of relief, we need to be responsible in looking at whether we can postpone some of the rates that we're asking them to pay. And this is really what we're asking Hutt City Council to do, is to look at a postponement. I understand that there are fees that are attached to that, which is a $250 fee, and then depending on how long we're asking for the postponement, those fees, I believe, are justified, and we're not asking for a handout that costs nothing, because nothing, everything comes at a cost. And we think that they're reasonable and equitable, but we would like to think that the council would look kindly on the increase of rates that are going to go out there, knowing that there is a component that is non-negotiable, which is the valuation, which are going to go up. And whilst we know that the commercial properties didn't go up as much as the residential, it is still an increase at this time where it will still affect us, particularly when there is no revenue coming in and landlords are trying to keep their tenancies. And I think that kind of captures everything. We've had building owners that have participated and come back to us that own 55 commercial businesses and properties across the Hutt Valley and Jackson Street, as well as others that are just along Jackson Street. A number of the business owners, landlords that have come back are people that have owned a number of commercial properties along the street. So their contribution to keeping those businesses and their properties is quite substantial. That's all I have to say. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Helen. Really appreciate that. Now, Councillor Hislop, did you have your hand up there? And then,
No, I didn't. I'd had it up earlier, but for Max's question.
gotcha. Okay, it's okay. Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Mute. Hi, thank you, Helen. Just a quick question. I know it's early days, but have you any indication of how many businesses in your in the program would be interested in taking up the policy as it is?
Out of those that have indicated, I have probably 5 landlords that are quite significant along the street. All 5 of them would look at possibly taking up a postponement. Obviously, 2 of them would prefer an abatement, but their next best option is a postponement, understanding the fees that would be incurred.
Thank you. Just one question I've got before I go to Councillor Dyer. Now, you mentioned around, you would have heard the comments from Max Sherlaw earlier around a 0% rates increase, and you did mention that councils are going to play a key role in that economic recovery, being able to do projects and so on. And there has been some commentary on that in the past day or so. Did you want to elaborate on that a bit further?
Absolutely. So we already know that central government have asked local government to look at projects that are shovel ready, and I'm assuming that Hutt City Council have a number of projects that are ready there. We also have heard from central government that they look, and the Treasury, that they're looking at lifting up, the borrowing threshold, but there still needs to be, to do business as usual, yes, you can tighten up your belts to do business as usual. But if you want a buffer where you've got a little bit more income coming in to actually activate some of those businesses, which is going to create that circular economy, then there needs to be some sort of revenue collecting that the council has. So I think it's totally unrealistic for a council to operate under a 0 increase budget if you expect them to play a really strong part in the activation of the economy across the board.
Thank you. And Councillor Dyer?
Yeah, thanks, Helen, for your presentation. Just a quick question on the $1.5 million suggestion. Have you sort of looked along the properties along the street and that's how you've based that number, or you think that'll cover most of Jackson Street, or you just think it's a slightly better option?
It's a combination of all of the options you've put up, Councillor Dyer. Yes, we have looked at the properties that are along the street, and yes, if you take into account the new valuations that are come in, which we are legislated that we have to use when we look at striking our rates. Whilst there's been a small increase in some of those commercial properties, there still has been movement. And looking down at our street, more of our businesses or properties would be bordering on over that 1 million. So we would like you to look at increasing that threshold from 1 million up to 1.5 or 1.25, but we think that benchmark is low.
Thank you. And final question, Councillor Mitchell.
Thanks, Helen. You talked about various businesses and property owners up and down Jackson Street.
Yeah.
Rates relief is something that we can offer to building owners. Yes. Directly, and not directly to business operators who don't own their own premises. I was wondering if you could give us a feel for, in your area along Jackson Street, how many businesses might own their own premises and how many landowners there are who don't own businesses.
Okay, so the owner operators along Jackson Street is a very small percentage. Those that took the opportunity before the huge boom in property markets did buy and take advantage because it was a better business model for them to own their building that they're in. So that's a very small percentage of it. The majority of our properties or landlords along the street are large property developers, because we have 5 or 6 landlords that own a significant amount of property along our street. But then we do have others that own 1 or 2 properties or are looking to increase their portfolio when properties become available. But I would like to sort of add to what you're saying. There are some people along the street, and I think when you're applying your rates relief or postponement, I think it's really important that how you ask the questions of people to fill out those forms is really important, and the language that you put around encouraging people to access that is important. I also think that there's a certain amount of trust we as councils have to put into the arena when we're asking people to put their hand up and ask for help and assistance. And I'm not thinking of the big landlords who own 1 or 2. I'm thinking of the, as you said, Councillor Mitchell, the person who owns their property and has their business in there. It's going to be a big ask for them to keep employing their people, paying their rates. We all know that there is a cost to unlock the door, and to give them some sort of relief would be great, and to not put them through the hoops, but to maybe have what some of the practices that central government have got there, that there is a certain amount of honesty there that's applied, that we maybe have first of all an online survey form or a form that they fill out, which makes it easy, and then for our rates people or the rates people to pick up that and then ask the second tier questions, but to make that first hurdle easy. And the reason why I say that is that 1/3 of my businesses are migrants along the street, and they're in the hospitality industry. And we sometimes make the assumption that because they speak English that they can read it. And I've been talking with the Chamber of Commerce, with Ethnic Affairs, with the Ministry of Health, and even MB, that you need to have that information that's translated first. For English people, speaking people, we know to scroll down the page. But for those of us that it's not, it needs to be obvious and it needs to be up there. And I would just throw that out there as hopefully a piece of helpful information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Really appreciate your time and the work that you'll be doing, obviously supporting those businesses going through a rough time as we get through this. So certainly looking forward to working closely with you on that. Sorry?
And me too. And thank you all very, very much for your time.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we also have Leonie Dobbs from Jackson Street Program as well, speaking to item 8. Leonie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, everyone. Look, I'm just really wanting to share some of the calls I've had from businesses along the street. As you know, Jackson Street is the jewel in the crown for Lower Hutt. And I suppose the concern from a lot of businesses is, can I afford to start my business up after lockdown? So we're certainly, the rates is an expense that the business owners are aware, but they are in not a good space at the moment, and especially when we don't know when the lockdown is going to go to stage 3 or stage 2. So I'm really only imploring the rest of the council to realise that I'd hate the street to go back to what it was before we started the Jackson Street program, knowing that a lot of businesses may struggle coming through this. So I suppose for me is if there's some way that you can be considerate on thinking of how our businesses can actually trade after this difficult time for these ones, is just to allow that to be in the back of your minds when we're doing the rate increases. Like Helen said, I know we're working very hard in central government on, looking at working with even Phil O'Reilly, of asking government to help some of those businesses with the overheads. So we're working closely with as I said, with Phil O'Reilly, to try and lobby, it's now Minister Twyford, of some of these overheads that the businesses are going to struggle with. So again, as an overhead for us is the rate. So I just want to say, hey, can you please keep that in mind? There's a lot of people out there in our business community that's struggling. So that's all I really wanted to share. I mean, Helen did the other nuts and bolts for you. I just wanted to plead from the bottom of my heart for our 220 members along the street and their businesses to try and get them through this difficult time. So that's me. Any questions?
Thank you, Leonie. Really appreciate that. Is there any questions from members?
Thanks very much, guys.
Hey, thank you very much, Leonie. And same message as we said to Helen, certainly looking forward to working with you and getting through this. Okay. We now have Colin Cashmore from Low Cost Bins. So speaking to item 8. Colin.
Hello, councillors. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak to you briefly this afternoon. I represent 3 New Zealand-owned companies, Brown's Bins, Al's Litter Bins, and our business Low Cost Bins. Between us, we employ 80 Lower Hutt people. The current waste system gives 96% customer satisfaction by your own consultation methods. Your consultation RFP is clearly tilted towards a rates funded of solid waste. We do not believe that this is sensible. Why replace 3 local successful businesses providing 96% customer satisfaction, competitive, flexible, and environmentally sound waste solutions with a prescriptive council-run tender process? In short, why fix something that isn't broken? Communities have so many other things that perhaps need council's attention at this stage more. As repeatedly stated, our preference is for council to not disrupt good businesses, considering rates funding of solid waste collection services with your RFP. Given the added pressure that is put on ourselves and the other 2 businesses I represent as essential services, we will not be in a position to be able to put in a tender under the current process. We understand and commend council's desire to reduce waste to landfill. However, rates funding of a waste service completely flies in the face of central government and MFE policy on this matter. Modern environmentally sensitive waste solutions all apply polluter pays. Fourthly, your consultants report Morrison Low in some areas is factually out of date and in many places actually incorrect, particularly around costing between various of the options that you put forward in your consultation process. In summary, we urge the councillors to take the time to ask some really important questions of this plan. It has been our opinion rushed through with limited thought and consideration to the impacts on our communities and does not actually provide the incentive to achieve waste minimisation. With consultation of this plan potentially being delayed, you have the opportunity to take a breath, ask the tough questions, gather information in what is such an important issue, and perhaps reconsider your approach to get the best overall outcomes for your community. We hope you consider to delay or preferably stop your process, save 80 jobs from 3 New Zealand companies, preserve the best environmental outcomes, and save the real costs and risks that the council would incur if they were to move to a rates funded system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin. Is there any questions from members? Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Colin, for your comments. My understanding was until today, and you've just spoken, that yourself and the other businesses that you represent would be putting in a tender, and that you were comfortable with an extension to the tender timeframe because of the COVID situation. Do you want to comment further?
Yes, that is partially correct, that previously an extension was appreciated, but since then events, as I'm sure you're aware, over COVID are changing very rapidly, firstly, and secondly, it was only ever our intention to put in a non-conforming bid around option 4 or some similar alternative. Under your RFP proposal, that actually hasn't been made clear that that is an option for us. So the answer is partially yes and partially no.
Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. I'm still not clear from that answer whether your big problem is the time pressure. You're under a lot of pressure now with the lockdown, as are a lot of businesses. Are you saying that the time pressure is your main problem to respond to that tender process, or just the formatting that the tender is in?
No, our main concern is the rates funding preference and the tilted RFP and questions that are asked, not based on factual information, lead us to believe that it would be difficult for us to put in a bid which would not be around rates funding to be considered in an open forum given the information you've been given. The timing does add difficulty, but the primary motivation is the rates funding component.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sutton.
Sorry, apologies, Councillor Sutton, your mic is muted.
That was the easiest question I've ever had to answer.
Sorry about that. I was getting confused. I'll start again. Sorry about that. Given that recycling markets globally are currently in a state of flux, how likely is it that, as per the tender documents, contractors will tender to assume the risk of commodity price changes?
I would bet my house that you will find that no contractor will assume that risk. The most recent examples I can give to you is the Auckland tender, which our company was lucky enough, and that is a commercial tender using a public-private partnership, mainly, and still retaining user pays. And that was clearly tagged. We were lucky enough to be involved with council in 200,000 properties of Auckland, all of which the council will take the commercial risk of price movement. And in the remainder of Auckland, exactly the same occurred. The same has occurred in other tenders ourselves and other companies have been involved in over the last couple of years. It's a long time since a contractor took that commercial risk. We've all been in your case, there is a possible movement of $3 to $6 million a year negatively from where it is now, let alone what you've evaluated. There is huge risk attached to the commodity price pre-COVID, let alone now, because I'm no economist, obviously, but if you see a deflation in the use and the market activity, that is a deflation in commodity prices. I'm not prepared to gamble how far that goes. I would suggest as councillors, if you take that risk, you'd be very brave yourselves.
Okay, we've just got time for two more questions because I'm conscious of our timing. So two who haven't asked yet around questions, Councillor Rashid and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colin, do you think that the terms of the tender are going to deliver real benefits for ratepayers, or should we be looking at other options?
My personal view is that rates funding of solid waste services suppresses innovation, because in a 9 to 10 year tender, that means that there is no opportunity for new solutions to be raised in that period of time. And obviously the world moves very quickly, in this particular case negatively. And so the structure around rates funding as an option, we do not believe is a good outcome for the Hutt City community.
Councillor Brown.
Kia ora, Colin. Thank you for your feedback. I've got a question and a comment. The lockdown has showed us that within a short space of time that the environment can repair itself, and that this whole focus was on reducing waste and working toward the zero waste environment. There's two places that I point to, Christchurch and Timaru, that do all three, and they have companies there that have been working on it for over 10 years. Are you saying that they stand by, both councils stand by that it works and it does a lot towards zero waste? Are you saying it doesn't work for those companies down there?
I'm not directly related in either of those. I am saying that they do reduce waste, no more than a user pays market does, but it's a significantly more net cost than the alternatives. They've also precluded themselves from modern innovation. And thirdly, you need to be extremely careful when you measure statistics, because we can all make statistics say certain things. And
I think so. I'd agree with that.
I could point you to a couple of studies that will give from the same analysis in waste that will give you a different outcome depending on which way you want to push the statistics. So I'm not suggesting that.
So you're saying the stats aren't correct?
I'm saying in some cases the stats are not correct. It depends what you multiply and divide the various things with. But I am saying that they do achieve waste reduction, which is critically important to our environment. There is one point I would like to make, if I could, is that there is a serious commitment from central government along those lines to increase the waste levy. And it appears that, I'm assuming, unless something's recently changed, that will occur, and that will add $40 to $50 a tonne to the disposal cost of waste, and that is signalling that polluter pays works from central government, and I don't think that in any of your costings you have factored any of that in. Therefore, if you were to go to a rates-funded system, your costs are going to go up significantly more than you budget, and you're still defeating the purpose of a waste levy.
Thank you, Colin.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you, Colin. And we will have officers who have been making notes respond to a number of those points as well. So thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
Okay. I've also just got a statement from Mr. Terry Hughes on items 8 and 9 of the agenda. So I'll just quickly read that out. Option 2, this is on item 8. Option 2 seems a sensible middle ground between do nothing and wait until you can't wait any longer. Essentially, the council will need to undertake a zero-based budget review on service costs and revenue, which is difficult given the current level of uncertainty. But this will need to factor in the ability of people to pay their rates, and the Hutt City Council activity will need to reduce to fit this, plus a sensible level of borrowing. On item 9, which is the Community Resilience Fund, with the $2,000 community grant, I would like to see this expanded to organisations such as civil defence teams that have had to purchase previously unneeded PPE gear to allow them to operate safely in the event of an emergency. So thank you, Terry, for that. And we'll certainly, if the officers could note down particularly those comments with the Community Resilience Fund, and we can address those when we come to that paper. Okay. So just moving through the agenda, thank you again to all the members of the public. I did allow a bit more time for each of them there, given we only had 4. And I think there was some good discussion and good feedback from that. So I just do want to cover a bit of a statement. As you all know, this is an incredibly difficult time for people right across our city and across our country and across the world with the impacts of COVID-19. And I just want to acknowledge the efforts of everyone in staying in their bubbles and helping combat that fight. And it's been heartening to see over the last couple of days those numbers of new cases drop down. And I think it shows that the actions that we are taking as a country are making a difference, but we don't want to become complacent. And it's important now, though, that us as a council and other agencies are looking at how we can, what we can be doing as we get out of this lockdown period. While the health is the number one priority of our people through this process, we do need to obviously acknowledge the impact that's going to have on businesses, the pressure that it's putting on them. And I don't want to sound alarmist, but the reality is that a number of businesses will fail and we will see unemployment across our community. It's in that context that we are meeting today to make decisions around our annual plan and the proposed rates increase, as well as additional measures to support our community. Putting that aside for a second, I also just want to acknowledge the work of our frontline service workers, those in our healthcare, and our shopping centres and our pharmacies, and all of those who don't have the luxury of being able to stay at home with their families at the moment. While obviously it's an adjustment for all of us, I know that there's a lot of pressure on them, and I think I can speak on behalf of all of us in passing our thanks to all those essential workers. And also just want to say it's been heartening to see that for the majority, people coming together and particularly touching base with senior members of our community and doing a whole bunch of work there. I know Whānau Ora, Kokiri Marae, I think they just put out 450 food packages to those most in need just over the last couple of days, and it's great to see those organisations step up to the plate. Of course, going back to our meeting, this isn't our first meeting since obviously this happened. We had our meeting just before the lockdown period began, and a number of measures were put in place then, and I just wanted to touch on them and give a bit of an update. So we've removed rates penalties in situations where people are experiencing hardship and are able to come and make an arrangement with council. So we've had a lot of contacts either via email or by phone with people touching base with us and coming to those arrangements, which has been great. And we encourage anyone out there who is finding it difficult to get in contact with us. We've also contributed 21,000 to local food banks and food-based charities to support people in hardship and struggling to make ends meet. So again, that's part of also the Whānau Ora Collective and Kokiri Marae and other organisations who have been doing great work in that space. Also, a shout out to our staff and council officials through the Welfare Centre with the emergency office which has been set up, and the work they're doing there to support those groups as well. We've also suspended all of our parking charges during level 4 and most of our enforcement other than safety issues or complaints. We've also suspended library charges and extended library loan periods naturally. We've also partnered with further with the Hutt Valley Chamber of Commerce. We've given them a one-off funding boost to support them in what is an incredibly important time that they're out there supporting other local businesses across the valley. And it's been great to see the webinars and sessions that they've been holding to help businesses through this difficult time, and particularly those who aren't used to using digital means in the daily operation of their business. And we've also sped up council payments to suppliers, and we're now paying them within 5 days, down from 30. I think we all agree that this is something which can continue well beyond this lockdown period, and once we get COVID-19, it's a good way to help support those suppliers. Also the $100,000 Community Resilience Fund, which we'll touch on later. This has been an extraordinary effort from all the council staff, and I just want to sincerely thank all of them for the effort and the work that they've done, and for moving at pace as well. It's been no mean feat, small feat to get these things up and get these things moving across our community, as well as working in with the new arrangement being based from home as well. So I want to give my sincere thanks. Also to our Chief Executive, Joe, for your leadership you're providing staff during this time, and also the actions that you've taken around cutting your own pay, and obviously some of the steps which are difficult conversations to have with staff and with wider stakeholders, but being willing to do that. And I do thank you for those steps, which we will cover later as well. Of course, there is more work to do. We have to ensure that our community is well supported through this economic crisis and health crisis that we are facing. I want to acknowledge all of the councillors for your work on this, and thank you for all of your collegiality through this process as well. With today's meeting, we obviously discussing the budget and what that means for our rates increase, and giving some certainty to our community moving forward. As we know, people and business right across the city are doing it tough, and it's important that we as a council tighten our belts. And that comes through obviously reducing proposed rates increase, but also conducting a line-by-line review of the budget of non-essential expenditure. There are a key range of issues that we will need to continue to address, whether that's the housing crisis in our city, whether that's easing congestion on our roads, rebuilding Nine-Eye Pool, rubbish and recycling services, and ensuring our basic infrastructure is up to scratch as well. All those issues aren't going to go away, and with the papers that are before us today and some of the options, they're not being ignored. It's a bit of a pause button to reassess and obviously take that immediate pressure off ratepayers. Some people have been asking why council is raising rates at all, and it's a fair question to ask, an absolutely fair question to ask. But I think it's important to know that councils, as Helen said before, are going to play an incredibly important role in the economic recovery and response to COVID-19. And we want to be careful that we aren't cutting to a point where we actually go against what government and what we're all trying to achieve. So we need to strike that balance, which is incredibly important. And I know we'll be touching more on that a little bit later on. Just with that, also, we need to make sure that any budget that we propose now is starting to deal with some of those bigger term or longer term issues that we face, but of course not necessarily loading all of that on in this current year, and allowing us to take that time through the rest of this year leading into the LTP as well for further consideration. Finally, I just want to touch on the central government's role in this, and obviously they play a huge role in regards to relief and support. And I think particularly when we look at rates relief for our people, one big part that is important is around the rebate scheme. I think that is something that is an opportunity for us to expand that scheme and how we can provide support for those who need it, and it can be targeted. So the Chief Executive and I have written to Minister Mahuta, Minister Robertson, making representations there, and I'll make sure I also table that letter as part of this meeting. But also we're talking about if there's any flexibility around the revaluation changes, because we know that even with a 0% rates increase from us, that would still mean up to 10 or 11% for some parts of our community. So if there's any flexibility there, we would love to be able to have that. So we've written to them and seen what can be done. And also just on the infrastructure shovel ready projects, we're working with the region's mayors on that, and to put up a list of things that are important, and also our own local list as well. So currently we're working on a range of proposals, including Nainai Pool, Eastern Bay's shared path, the wharves to Point Howard and Petone, housing developments through Urban Plus, upgrading our 3 water infrastructure as well. These are all projects that we know will have a significant stimulus for our local economy, and also achieve a number of other outcomes. So it's going to be really important that we work with those other councils in that wider list, but also that we're putting the best case forward to help governments stimulate the economy, local economy, and that we're part of that. So I think that's probably enough from me. I just want to finally reiterate that obviously a lot of work has been done around what a long-term plan amendment has been and what was proposed to go up for consultation a couple of days ago, but we are in a different world. We know that our business and our people are really struggling out there in a lot of areas, so we need to make sure that we take a balanced approach. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater on a number of issues we face, but making sure we find that right balance. And I'm hoping that with all of your help on that, we'll be able to reach that today and then moving forward as well. So now I'll just pass it over to our Chief Executive, Joe Miller, for your statement.
Kia ora, Mayor and Councillors. Mayor Barry, I won't touch on anything you've touched on. Our focus has been on providing essential services and moving other services to being online, and specifically developing the proposals that are before Council today. It's fair to say that we've digitised at pace, including moving our call centre to a completely virtual operation, which is no small undertaking, particularly when the underlying systems that services rely on are out of date and clunky. It's proving challenging, and I'm hopeful that challenge isn't apparent during the remainder of this meeting, fingers crossed. In terms of emergency management, the Hutt City Emergency Operations Centre is running 7 days per week with a 4 days on, 4 days off shift pattern. We're supporting regional colleagues in Remo and in the Ministry of Health around contact tracing. As an emergency management team, I also meet every day to look at exactly what the state of operations is across the city, not just in terms of now, but also thinking about recovery and when we do eventually change some of the alert level we're in, what that's going to mean for services and the way they're delivered. In terms of rates, we've tried to be proactive in getting the messages out on rates relief to our community, extending the time for payment and urging people to contact us for assistance. So far, we've helped 116 ratepayers. 103 of those are residential and 13 are businesses. This includes people applying for government assistance, the accommodation supplement and rate rebate schemes, and also arrangements to pay. Our big message has been contact us. If you're struggling to pay, we'll help you. We're promoting those messages on the channels Neighbourly and on radio. In terms of the list of essential services, we know that noise nuisance has been a particular issue, and whilst we've been continuing to take calls and log, we haven't been able to visit unless something's an emergency, because noise nuisance isn't anticipated, it isn't currently an essential service. We've been lobbying very hard on that, not least to relieve pressure on our police colleagues during this difficult time, and I'm hopeful that we hear something about that very soon. You've mentioned welfare initiatives, Mr. Mayor. These include our Team Manakitanga. This is council employees who cannot work from home, effectively moving into that team to support other work that's being done. So, for example, some of those employees are working for the Ministry of Social Development, calling elders across the region who are over 70 to make sure they have everything they need during lockdown. Staff and vehicles are supporting local organisations to pick up and deliver food and medicine and sanitation across our city, including providing vehicles to the local rununga for the delivery of food and sanitation. If I touch on waste, as you know, I explained that we were only able, in fact, some councils aren't collecting any recycling at all. We would manage to secure a glass market, but what is proving difficult for us at the moment is that actually that waste isn't sorted. It's not coming out as pure glass. We're doing our best to get the messages out, and we're looking at what else we can do, but that is causing us some issue. And of course, if our recycling plant had an optical sorter where we could sort waste without human intervention in the same way, then we'd be able to do a bit more that way. So there is a need to significantly do something about that. I'll mention the waste tender because Colin Cashmore spoke to you earlier, and I've met with Colin a couple of times and spoken to him a couple more, and I'm very clear. He said to me this afternoon, in fact, at 12 o'clock, that they were definitely putting in a tender around alternative provision, and he's very clear that we welcome that tender. And that we will actively look at it. And he was also clear that the timing would work for them as a business. That's not to say that they, like everybody else, aren't facing challenging times. In terms of the consultation on waste, on the actual waste and what people want in the city, then subject to the report on your agenda later, should you choose to go with not going with an LTP amendment, then that consultation would move until around August of this year. So still enough time to inform the future provision and tender, but also with sufficient time to perhaps answer any queries that will remain. Just want to touch on businesses, if I may. We've got a strong partnership with the Chamber of Commerce and Upper Hutt councils to provide support to local businesses, including the Love Local campaign, networking opportunities and business advice, specifically supporting some of those small businesses who perhaps do not have such a digital presence. We've established an online resource hub with a business Facebook group, which is now in 3 weeks has over 500 members and is live streaming webinars 4 days a week with local experts. So local business is providing support to local business. And further sector-based networking opportunities are being explored to enable local businesses to connect locally with suppliers as we come out of where we're at now, the development and strong local supply chains is going to be more important than ever. Our proactive direct contact with the Chamber of Commerce has been significantly expanded, and we've got a fast track around any issues that are coming in. And we're also sharing any of those issues then that come forward with Ellington XZ and with the Ministry for Business and Innovation. Proactive contact's been made with over 200 businesses, for example, checking out where they're at. So just not waiting for people to come to us. And we're particularly focused there on supermarkets, pharmacies, accommodation suppliers, medical centres to offer support and gather information so that we get a granular understanding of what's happening in our businesses. In terms of staff, I'm very proud of the work that staff are doing. We've all had to change at pace, and what I will say to you is, obviously, I'm your employee, and thank you for your acknowledgement of the action that I've taken. Our staff live our values every day, showing they care, being connected, and having courage. Manakitangi, Te Honanga, and Kia Kaha. And with that in mind, I have spoken to union colleagues and written to all staff yesterday to explain that as part of where we're at, we will be seeking for there to be a pay freeze effectively until July 2021 as part of our effort to support what's happening in this great city. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you again for all your work. So really do appreciate that. So we'll move now on to item 6, conflict of interest declaration. So is there any conflict of interest from councillors? No? Okay, great. So we'll move on to item 7, which is the response to the COVID-19 pandemic review of rates postponement policy. So Joe, this is with you, and is Jenny as well covering this one? Yep, so I'll let you speak to the paper, and then any questions from councillors will go from there.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just so the paper's before you, it speaks for itself. What I will say to you is this, and I thought we had some very powerful contributions from Leonie and Helen earlier on. Actually, Jenny will be able to confirm this, but a capital value of 1.5 million, as they suggested, we could manage within that policy should Mayor and Council wish to respond to that question from them. What I will say to you is this is a policy we are proposing for now. We need to understand how COVID unpacks, what the effects on its business are. And so the proposal in this paper is to make available relief for businesses that wasn't there before. There was only relief for over 65s and residential ratepayers. This is to make that available. If we find that it is actually not doing enough, then we'd come back to you and say, actually, there may be something else we need to do. So I suppose my message to you in presenting this to you is it's an enhanced and increased policy for now, but it shouldn't stop us doing anything we need to support our mission, which is making sure that everybody in this city thrives.
Thank you. Jenny, do you have any further comments?
Good afternoon, councillors. Just in response to the $1.5 million, I just wanted to find, there is an appendix on page 32, which shows the different levels of businesses and the capital values and so on. So with the $1.5 million, we could certainly, council could decide to change the policy to that level. There'd be potentially 1,905 properties that could benefit from the policy. And in terms of the dollar impact, the amount of rates, it would increase from potentially a total amount of $11 million of annual rates that could be postponed. So obviously this rates postponement policy is a really important part of our rates relief, and we've tried to do this quickly and at pace. It is a draft policy. The policy is recommending that we set up a subcommittee to just refine it and work through some of the bits. There's some little bits that could be tidied up a little bit. One of the items of feedback that I have also had is around, there's one clause in the eligibility clause that says that you have to own your property for 6 months before you can apply for this. So that's another recommendation that council could decide to remove that criteria in the policy. Another item I just wanted to cover, there are some fees. So there's an establishment fee of $250 and annual management fee of $100. Now, to help ratepayers, we can include that in the amount of rates that gets postponed. So they would only need to pay that at the end after, they've over the event, over COVID-19, and we get past it and they're back into the repayment period. So I just wanted to cover off those pieces. Also just mention, currently the rates postponement policy, we don't have much of an uptake. We've only got about 4 ratepayers. So potentially, we're going to have a large number now going forward. So we really need to tidy up our process for handling those and get geared up, and we haven't done that yet. We've really just been focusing on trying to get the policy going, and once we've got council decision on the policy, we can get on it and try and work through a process where we can really try and help our ratepayers so that they can progress through this process and feel that they're getting the right help that they need. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jenny. I think that covers a couple that I had, and I know others have raised around the fees and putting them on to paying later, and the flexibility there. So would you be recommending that the subcommittee work through those types of issues, or is just to clarify?
Yes, definitely. That'd be great if we can just work with the subcommittee to get it done and keep working at pace so we can implement as soon as possible.
Yeah, no, thank you. So we've got a few questions. Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, I'm happy having heard just what Jenny just said then, that if it's going to be worked through with the subcommittee, maybe it's best to direct my thoughts there. But just quickly, they were removing that 6 month. Sorry, my questions were, in the report it mentions that the policy would have, if it was to have wider implications, then we may need to trigger a special consultative procedure. Would the 1.5 million cap do that? And if it wouldn't, what would the cap be we could go up to before that would get triggered? Or is it a tricky question at this stage?
Okay, there's no definite right or wrong answer here. So it's really a judgment call, because it's such early days with COVID-19, we really don't know how many businesses and residential properties would want to apply for this policy. In terms of the difference between the $1 million and the $1.5 million, that potentially the $8 million of rates that could be postponed versus the $11 million total rates postponement, that doesn't sound like a material change to me. If you were saying let's not put a cap on it at all, all business rates potentially, then I'd go, whoa, that's definitely significance policy. So I think there's also a judgment call from councillors in terms of your understanding of how the public or our ratepayers would feel about this policy. If you think there was good support for it, then that's more of a reason not to consult, that you really have that knowledge. We did consult in 2018 on the over 65s policy, so you've got that background as well. So there's definitely a judgment call around this. And the other thing is that council may just choose to, you may want to consult anyway, just to clarify, but it will slow down the process in terms of implementing and getting on with this and providing the rates relief that is needed right now.
Thank you very much. And just a quick follow-up, a second question is, with the Greater Wellington regional rates that we collect, are people that are going to be part of this policy, will they still have to pay the regional council proportion, or is regional council looking at doing something similar? Or
No. So I've spoken with the CFO at Greater Wellington Regional Council, and they're supportive of this policy. Basically, the full amount of rates would be postponed. It would just mean that Greater Wellington wouldn't get their portion of it, so their cash flow would be impacted as well. But they're supportive of the policy, and
Thank you, Councillor Dyer. Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny and Joe. The report tells us that these, when we're talking about the 1 million or 1.5 million cap, that the figures in front of us are based on the old valuations. I take it it would be a lot of work and some time off before we would be able to see some figures based on, valuations for commercial properties have gone up between 22 and 33%, and it'll push businesses up each bracket, I guess. We don't have any further information on that.
Yep, we just did this report pretty quickly, so we just used the current financial year's rates, and obviously there's uncertainty around what the rates increases will be for next year, so it was easier just to take the rates that we know about. We know that businesses on average have increased by about, was it 18 or 19% so in capital value, so that will push up and the amount of businesses that could apply for this relief. So that could be another reason why to lift the cap from the $1 million up to the $1.5 million as well.
And based on the figures that we do know, you wouldn't think that the total exposure, if we went to 1.5 million, would be much more than the 11 million you're sort of estimating at the moment.
No, it would be slightly lower than that. So, you know, it could be 10.5 million or something. I'm not sure, but it'll be slightly less than that. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Milne.
Yes, thank you. Couple of questions. The establishment fee of 250, is that covering all legal costs? Is that actually a realistic figure for the amount of work that's involved in processing an application?
So the key cost for us is statutory land charge, and the other key thing is really the staff time to do it. So currently we've only had a few applicants, so it's been done within an existing staff resource. If we are now getting, you know, potentially hundreds of applicants, we're going to have to resource up for that. So a lot of unknowns in terms of costs. I think in terms of the legal piece, it's a pretty simple standard process, and you know, it's not complex, that lodging the statutory land charge. So I don't expect there'll be too much, you know, too many legal costs incurred then, and our internal resource could help get us going and set up properly. Yes, I suppose for me the biggest risk is around the staffing impact and the resource required there, and it's probably going to be you know, for a short period of time we'll have a big load of work and then it'll drop off again. So we'll just have to figure out how best to do that, and I'm not sure what the cost of that's going to be.
Okay. There's a comment made in paragraph 33 that increased debt will inevitably mean that there's less capacity for other projects. But the way I see this is that if we've got a 60% security on the debt, minimum of 60% security, and we're charging a 1% margin on the debt, then really there's very little actual risk to the ratepayer, and in fact it has no impact on our debt servicing capacity. So just unsure as to why we would then say that we have to reduce capacity to do other projects.
So yes, in terms of you know, it's low risk in terms of we've got you know, statutory land charge and that 60% cap. So you know, we will get our rates paid back to us at some stage. I suppose it's the lost or the opportunity cost. Our current financial strategy has got a debt limit of 150% and dropping down to the 90%, and we're going to be operating within that financial strategy. And so if we are pushing our debt up by, say, that $11 million or wherever it goes, potentially higher than that, depends on the uptake, then we, you know, if we want to add extra capital projects into our work program, then we're going to have an issue with, you know, the amount of debt capacity that we've got, and that could restrict our decisions going forward. But I suppose we are going to be going into the next LTP process, and if we follow with what we did with the proposed LTP amendment, where we're going to increase that debt cap, then that issue would, you know, go away, assuming that we do increase the limit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
I'm listening.
Thank you there. Siri's listening too, apparently. I just had a couple of notes and a couple of questions, Jenny, regarding eligibility criteria and who may or may not be eligible for these postponements. And the first one relates to homeowners and to the equity requirement, the 60% equity requirement. Does that not exclude a lot of first-time home buyers who may have bought in recent years, particularly unfortunately in suburbs like Wainoiamata and Nainai, where the rates increases are going to be the highest? Still can't hear you, Jenny.
Whoops, sorry, I clicked it back off again. Yes, that could exclude people applying, you're quite correct. That 60% cap is from the existing policy that's in place, so it's just been retained, and that's where it's come from. But yeah, you're quite right. It would limit people that could apply.
And would it be a big risk for us in that case to raise that cap from 60% to something higher?
I suppose we don't want to go too high, but we could increase it slightly. Yeah, a judgment call as well at this stage, because we've got such limited information.
Yeah. And the other question I had was relating to the clause on page 29 of our agenda, the entity entered on council rating information database as the ratepayer must not own any other rating units other than a residential property in the case of a business, or in the case of a business, their residential property. Does that limit eligible businesses to owner-operator businesses?
Oh, gosh, I'm wondering whether maybe, I think so. Can we possibly do this through the subcommittee, that we work through some of the details?
Yeah, I was just concerned that it was excluding, you know, we heard from the Jackson Street program that the number of owner operators is actually really low.
Mm-hmm.
And if they were excluded from owning more than one business property, then we really are owner operators or small operators.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I'm sorry, can we, probably best to just take it offline, that one.
Okay, I was just really, I guess, trying to get my head around, are we offering postponement to all commercial property owners under that financial limit, or is it somehow being restricted to want to own and operate their own business?
So there's no clause at the moment. The policy's been written really, really broadly, and it's really just looking at, you know, you've got that dollar limit. It's basically applying, you know, there's very few restrictions on it. So whether somebody owns the property, you know, if they, yeah, very broadly. So there aren't restrictions of that nature.
Thank you.
And if it's helpful, I think Councillor Mitchell raises a really good point around the issue when you've got obviously a business in a building that they don't own. I suppose the committee or officers can maybe turn their mind to what sort of options are out there to deal with that issue. And I think that would be quite good to come back to the subcommittee with. Also understanding that central government are moving in that space as well. So mindful that they may solve some of those issues. But very, very good points. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Jenny. I've got two questions. Under there's the two policies there for individuals. One's for hardship and one's for over 65. That over 65 came in 2018, and hardship's been in for a lot longer. But I note that there's been zero given out for hardship. Are they applying and been declined, or are people in hardship just not applying? And could there be a mix of hardship in relation to what Councillor Mitchell said to the 60%? And I have got another question about the schools, but I'll just ask that one first.
So my understanding is this policy hasn't been promoted at all, or very, very lightly, and if people just haven't applied.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my understanding. Yeah, I'm not aware of any since I've been in place. I'm aware of none that have been declined. We just don't get any applicants.
Okay. Okay. So second question is that there's a rates postponement for wastewater for schools. Is that offered to all the schools as a standard, or is it just if they find out about it, they apply?
My understanding is that it's applied to all the schools.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, there's no other questions. So I just want to open it up. I think what would be helpful, given this is going to a subcommittee, is for any councillors to provide feedback on what that subcommittee should consider. Obviously, we've got the draft policy there. Any additions to that or any areas that it doesn't touch on? I think we've covered the issue around small businesses who don't own their building. Also going to 1.5 million. I think that's a very fair point from Leonie and Helen. Is there any other key considerations councillors would like the subcommittee to look into? Councillor Dyer?
Yeah, the other one I would like to consider is the 60% cap that was brought up. Sorry, not the 60%, the 6-month limit on people having owned the property. I understand it was put in there because of the over 65 policy, and obviously people that are turning 65 have known they're turning 65 for the last 65 years of their life. But with this event-based stuff, people couldn't have seen this coming, and yeah, I think for that reason it needs to be excluded for at least for the event-based trigger.
That's good feedback. I think there'd be agreement across the board on that. Yep, a lot of head nodding. That's great. Councillor Mitchell.
Just a couple of other things I think for that committee to consider for the purpose of clarity. And one is that I think this policy makes reference to financial hardship without defining what that is. And I think that one thing the government have done really well with their policies is to define things well. So all businesses knew what it meant if they lost 30% of revenue over a particular year. As an example, we don't necessarily need to follow the same definition. Otherwise, it's quite open to interpretation and maybe to people having differing ideas of what that means. The other thing I noticed in there is that there was a reference to after 1 year after the event ends to people making arrangements to repay their outstanding rates, but no reference whatsoever as to how long that might take. Whereas I think for the under 65 ones, it defined 18 months. So just putting some more clarity around definitions and expectations, I think.
Cool. Yep. Got that, Jenny? Yep. Any Councillor Briggs?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Taking up on Jenny's point around the lack of promotion with some of our previous opportunities, I think it would be great if the subcommittee can look at how we can promote it, particularly with our limited channels at the moment during COVID, to make sure that anyone that should be applying is applying.
Yep, oh, that's good. That's one the comms team will be able to maybe provide some feedback on as well for us. Yep, oh, that's good. Anything else? No? Okay. Well, thank you. So I'll move to the recommendations. So they should pop up on our screen here. We'll give this a test. Catherine, if you're able to, here we go. That's great. Excellent. So we've got the recommendations in front of us. So I'm noting the, I think just having an additional recommendation in there, noting the feedback from the committee and that this be considered by the subcommittee along those lines. So everything that's been captured there, officers will be on that, but we'll just put that down for the record. Excellent. Okay, so I'll move the recommendations in front of us. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Briggs. Okay, so we can move back now to, if everyone's had a chance to read them, to our screens, great. So just speaking to this, I just want to thank again the work of officers to prepare this and get this in front of us, and the pace that has been moved to get to this point. And really it is an opportunity for us to see what we can be doing to support people and business across our community, particularly those small business operators. So I'm looking forward to the subcommittee delving into that. I know that I think it's important to note that there's still a lot of announcements likely to come from central government around support they'll be providing for business, and these issues like rent, which is a far larger one for a lot of businesses to be paying, or the commercial property owners as well. And it's been great to see actually a number in the hut who have been providing rent holidays. So that's been great to see. So yeah, I'd like to open it up to the floor for anyone else to comment. Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is one of the few meaningful levers that we do have as a council, and for us to be implementing a policy that will have significant impacts for some households and businesses is the appropriate thing to be doing. Hearing from officers and reading through the report, we can still operate the majority of our business as planned and not be impacted too severely at our end, but the relief that we're providing will be significant. So I wholeheartedly support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Briggs. Any other councillors? Councillor Dyer.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll also be supporting the motion. I think the fact that it's cost neutral to council, it doesn't cost us anything to support those that are in need. And also in light of the next agenda items coming up, I think this is a really meaningful thing that we can actually do to help the ones that actually need the help. right now. So yeah, I'll be supporting the motion.
Any other councillors? No, that's great. And just to say, with the subcommittee that's established, please, all councillors, if you have any thoughts or anything that you'd like to share with us, do send it through. We'll make sure that we're also including the full council in what's coming to us as well, obviously. So we want to hear your feedback or any ideas you have. But I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those against, no. Declare that carried. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so we'll move on to item number 8, which is our response to the COVID-19 pandemic and draft annual plan considerations. So Joe, I'll hand it over to you, and then we'll go into questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This paper has also been put together at speed, and I'd like to thank councillors for taking part in the discussion earlier this week. I hope the report broadly reflects the conversations we've had. Obviously, we've had a steer to get to here. There was a great deal of hard work went into the LTP amendment, and I'd like to think that that work still stands us in good stead for the future. In terms of some of the, not just the challenges, but also the opportunities that the city faces, not least, for example, including Melling, where we've got significant government funding to make something happen that people have wanted to happen for a long time, but it's going to require us to tip some more into the pot to make that happen. But officers working with members have recognised in this report that where we said we were going to be 6 months ago and all the decisions you took back in February, just we don't think are a realistic way to go right at the moment. You will recall at your last council meeting where we broadly signed off the LTP amendment, you had a glowing audit opinion from Audit New Zealand. They're not in the meeting today, but you and I, Mr. Mayor, have both spoken to Andrew Clark, as has Jenny, our CFO. It's fair to say that were we to proceed, and I didn't get a sense the other day from members that that's where they were, but were you to proceed with the LTP as planned, the audit opinion that was there would no longer be there. We'd need to redo it again because some of the uncertainties that COVID-19 is bringing the economy would need to be reflected. So you'll see in there that there is what in effect would have been our LTP consultation paper, but I couldn't say to you that that is the final version because we would need to go back through that process. So I just want to acknowledge that. So we had an opinion, we don't have one now. If you were to proceed with 7.9 lead, then we would need to go back and secure that. You will see that the option of a 0% rise is also in there. It's important that we put that up. I heard some commentary earlier that doesn't require an amendment and all sorts of things. What I will say to that is this. Whilst we've all been in our respective bubbles and we're doing this council meeting from our respective bubbles, as officers, we're not working in a bubble all of our own. We are working in step with councils across New Zealand. We are working, taking into account the advice from Local Government New Zealand that have been procured, from Solgum, and there's been a number of times I think over recent months where we've perhaps had some suggestions that a balanced budget doesn't matter, that a zero-based budget, sorry, that a 0% rise now wouldn't require consultation. This is our professional advice, which we give to you, and I think which reflects the professional advice that all of our colleagues are working with across New Zealand. In terms of I think the table the table in the report sets out, if you like, the various different things that would apply in relation to each option, whether you need to consult, the type of consultation, and I'd commend that to you. It's a fairly similar table to one that other councils are using. I just want to mention income. These are uncertain times, and the report refers to the fact, well, two things actually. One thing is that I've said that over, if you recall, over the course of this coming year, we will do a full zero-based budget review. I'm not going to have done that by the end of June, but we will by the end of June, and we're already working on it. You won't be surprised to look at all of the assumptions upon which the budget was predicated. So I've mentioned that one of those was pay, and if you like, the amount that's gone in, for example, taking a pay freeze, which would require breaching our collective agreement, and I'm talking to union colleagues constructively about that. But that is about $1 million. That equates to, on an average salary of $70,000. That's 15 jobs. So it's going to be important that we just understand all of those things as we move forward. So the big thing for me is in terms of the corrections in the report. We won't have a zero-based budget done by June. That's what I mean by a zero-based budget, is going back and looking at the whole budgets and what is spent where and what is the cost of each individual activity. And the reason for that is that because you as governors set the priority and set the parameters within which you want us as officers to work. It's my job and the job of my officers to give you the information that actually says, well, this is where we'd like the money to be spent. But what we can do before we come back to you is to go through that line by line review of the budget and identify areas where we can trim cost. I probably won't say much more than that, I don't think, Mr. Mayor. I'll let Jenny introduce it. What I will say is I want to acknowledge the work of the team who have done this at pace, and whilst mine and Jenny's name is on this, this report is the results of the hard work of a lot of people and is effectively presented to you by myself and my corporate leadership team.
Thank you, Joe. Jenny, I'll move it over to you, and then we'll go into questions.
I'll just briefly add to what Joe's mentioned. Just talk to the LTP amendment and those important decisions that we're going to progress through the LTP process. If you turn to page 7, there's a summary in there of the key topics that we had in the LTP, and I just wanted to clarify with this option of an emergency budget or the 1-year budget and the 3.8% rates increase. So that just briefly, what we would be doing in terms of the LTP aspects, nine-eye pull, we wouldn't be taking out, we've got $1.5 million in 2020-21, so next year. That budget would be retained in there, so we could progress through the planning, building consents, resource consents, demolition work. So there'd be some work that can continue over the next year ahead of the LTP process happening and decisions around construction. The rest of our capital program, so we'd leave everything as is. All the decisions that have been made already would stay in place, and for the first year of the plan, and all the future years of the plan, all those budgets would basically be on hold. Particularly things where we've increased budgets by big amounts, we'd need to wait through the LTP process just to confirm those decisions and the prioritisation of the capital works program. Obviously, the financial strategy, there'd be no changes to our debt limit or rates increases as had been proposed in the LTP. The bit that we will pick up in the budget, the emergency budget, would be the rating differential. So that change in policy around freezing the rating differentials for 1 year. So we're going to include that and make sure that we include some public engagement across that. And then the rubbish and recycling, as has been mentioned, we would be working towards a consultation process in about August later in the year to get that decision. So hopefully that helps in terms of just those important LTP pieces, being clear about how we're going with those and the next steps with those. Yeah, I think Joe's done a comprehensive introduction, so I won't add anything more at this stage. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. We'll open up for questions. Councillor Mitchell.
Jenny, that list you were just talking about, the 4 topics that were in the LTP amendment, my understanding was that the reason they were each in there was because in of themselves they were significant enough to require that amendment.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we proceed with the ratings differential without having an LTP amendment?
Well, what we in effect are proposing is that we're freezing the rating differential for 1 year. So we, if we take the preferred option that we're going with, in terms of it's not a significant impact in itself, compared to our current state. So, there's a judgment call there. I think we have already sent out information, and talked about that solution, and councillors need to consider the feedback that they've had on that in deciding whether we include that. But that's our proposal, that we'd include it and we'd make a decision, and we'd say that it's not, a significance, meeting the significance threshold.
So providing some further clarity on that, Jenny, it's the reason it was part of the LTP was the totality of the changes that were being proposed. Is that right? And then that was originally, and that's why if you're only doing that part of it, it doesn't reach that threshold, in essence.
Yeah, because I think initially we were also thinking about going further. There was broader options around going further in terms of starting to reverse it as well. Where here, what we're proposing, even though it does impact all ratepayers, the proposal actually is just to freeze our position. So there's actually, a minor impact in the short term, and it's appropriate to put it through an emergency budget. It's meeting our goals in terms of, the financial hardship and rates relief to people.
Thank you. Councillor Dyer.
Yes, one thing I've just noted in the report on page 19 of the supplementary paper is that obviously we've had a very generous offer of the CEO volunteering to give up her salary, but I noticed in the paper the word salary is actually missed from the report. So if we could get that put in there, because I think it's quite important. And also on page 67, under the heading, considering how best to implement a recent revaluation, the report says you could amend your rates remission policy so that rate increases were limited this year. However, the lost revenue from that remission would be spread over all ratepayers. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
So what's being, one of the options that we would, so that's in the advice from Local Government New Zealand, in that piece of advice. Sorry, I didn't find that page. So yeah, the remission would basically be that we'd say to, we can develop a policy, a remission policy, to limit the amount of rates increases to some properties. So say, for example, properties that have had an increase of more than 15%, we'd say that we'd develop a policy to remit that, or over 10% or something. Pretty complex, needs a lot of work. I think it would need a consultation process as well. So, I don't think that's a practical solution right now. Maybe something we can look at longer term, but I don't think it's doable right now.
Okay, Councillor Sutton. Microphone, Councillor Sutton, sorry. No, still can't hear you there.
You hear me now?
Let's go, yep.
Yep, sorry. So I'm to take it that the 1.1 for the 9i pool still makes up the 3.8% increase that we're proposing here in option 2. If that's the case, I just wondered, given the circumstances, why no thought has been given to the 9 million that was originally set aside for the 9i hub being used instead. I take it that 9 million is still there. And also, I take it that 3.8 still retains the provision for paying the living wage for contractors and also for the community engagement.
Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to answer on the living wage, and I'll let Jenny pick up the others if that's acceptable.
Yep.
So in relation to the living wage, the majority of council, not all, I acknowledge, expressed a desire to move forward with that policy intention. It's fair to say, in this very uncertain world that we're in, that all we can promise to do with that is our best, rather than to make that a blanket. So, for example, we can, one of the things we want to do is to encourage local supply as much as possible, local labour supply, local supply chains in our contracting for those contracts that come up. And there aren't too many this year, but one of the things we'll need to be looking at is how we may be able to vary the terms of some of those contracts. For example, when contracts do actually come up for renewal, we will ask people to tender on both a living wage and non-living wage basis. And I'm happy, as always, to be transparent and accountable to members for what's happening as it goes along. So I think unlike previously, Councillor Sutton, whereas before there was a definite, I think we can only at the moment have a try our best, given that we need to understand the markets in which we're operating.
Okay, Jenny, do you want to cover those other points?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the question was, but just in terms of 9i pool and the extra 1%. So yes, all the budgets that had been approved to be progressed in the first year plan, we're not proposing any changes in there. So the 3.8% is basically covering off exactly, we're including exactly the same budgets for that first year. We have a shortfall in, we're losing revenue, rates revenue as a result of a reduction in rates. And so we are having to increase our debt and fund that loss of revenue through increased debt. So yeah, that's basically what's happening. Councillor Sutton, can I just question if there's any other queries that you want responded to there?
Yep, Councillor Sutton. Yep.
Oh. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Yep. No. That I think that explains. Yeah. So basically, yeah, that's fine.
And just to clarify, Jenny, the cost for 9i pool, the 1%, so the operational. So just to clarify exactly, so does that's built into that 3.8 number, or not?
Well, what is the 3 point? Basically, the budget is staying the same. So the amount that we'd included in the budget, the $1.5 million of extra funding for the first year, we're not changing that. So we can get on with all that work in terms of planning and so on. So I suppose there's, what is the 3.8 covering? Because we've got a gap. You could say it's covering certain things or not. There's no right or wrong answer to that, really.
No, I'm with you. There's a lot to, yeah, that makes sense. And obviously having additional debt to have to cover things.
Yeah.
So just to be clear on that, Mr. Mayor, then, so we've got that £1.5 million in this year, but were you to continue beyond that to build and finance 9i pool, that will require, where you had 1% additional on in the LTP for that, we'll still need to come to that decision in the future. But there's sufficient money this year to be able to do some design and demolition.
Cool. No, thank you. I think that clarifies it. So, Councillor Bassett.
No. Can you hear me?
Yep, good to go.
You can. Okay. Look, one of the things, and it's probably only in the last couple of weeks that we really have started to really focus on this budget, because if I can recall back at our council meeting on the 18th of March, there wasn't a great appetite. The appetite was to approve the 7.9. Now, I'd actually like to hear from you, Mr. Mayor, from a governance perspective. Could you tell me what process that you have been with your governance team is to actually have a good detailed look at this budget? I really want to hear from you from a governance perspective rather than from an officer's point of view.
I'm happy to answer that. So over the last 2 weeks, essentially since that meeting, obviously things have been changing rapidly, the environment that we're in. So I've discussed that with the chairs of committees and obviously spoke to all councillors a couple of days ago. I know you're unable to make that meeting. I think there were some technical issues to get you in. And that's where also working with officers to present further options to us. But what's clear is what's been presented in this report is if we are minded to go to a 3.8% option, that further work on what the budget looks like will need to come back to us. So that's, but it's been to give a clear steer from us as governors that it's not business as usual and we do need to adapt.
So what you're saying to me, apart from the meeting that I couldn't get to, have the chairs of the respective standing committees, have they spent some time with you going through this basically a line by line and looking at this because of the seriousness of the issue?
Well, it's not governors, our role to go line by line through the budget. That's what we're asking officers to do today, so they can bring a budget back to us later this month in early May for them to do that work. So we need to set the parameters first. No, but what I'm suggesting, okay, not necessarily line by line, but certainly to look at each line to what it actually means and potentially where a cut can be made. Has the team got around the table and worked its way through that? Well, I can assure you we haven't gotten around at a table in the current environment, but we've certainly been in touch virtually and been talking about that. But like I said, the work needs to be done from officers at an operational level for then us to go through it and consider. And if we go through with the 3.8 option, that gives us a number of weeks to then move forward with this, or to then consider it and sign off a budget. So this gives us a bit more. Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, but what I'm probably trying to suggest is the leadership in terms of what is actually taken out and what projects are to be examined really should come from it. Well, I see it coming from a governance perspective. And that's really my question really is, what leadership has the governance group from a governance point of view, given its in terms of its direction to officers? Well, David, we're giving the direction now for officers to prepare a budget within those parameters, and the leadership is acknowledging that a 7% rates increase won't wash, and we need to react to that and respond. So it can't all be solved in the last week. There's been plenty going on, and that budget will be prepared because that's what the role of officers are, is to prepare that information, and then we will go through it, and then we will consider exactly what's in that final budget in early May. Yeah, and I appreciate that the officers has been a tremendous job in what they've done, but we haven't, certainly I haven't had a great deal of time to look at that paper. And that's the point. I just wanted to know what direction your team had actually given the officers, that's all. But you've answered the question. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Brown?
Thank you. So just in terms of what's been proposed with the differential, what will the intake be in regards to, I'm thinking about the residential rates, what intake would be for them, and what impact would it have, these proposed changes on their rates, on their residential rates? That's going to be really important for Wainuiomata, even if it were at an actual payment level, what they would be paying under what's proposed.
So I haven't got the exact details with this new revised 3.8%. When we had the 7.9%, the average residential property was going to have a reduction in rates of $51 per annum. So it's probably about half of that, approximately, that all residential properties, if we implement the change to the rating differential, well, not the change, the freezing of it for 1 year, that'll be about $25 per annum, something like that, around about that. But it will depend on each property's value and so on.
No, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Mitchell, then Councillor Dyer. Councillor Briggs.
Just a quick comment and maybe a question, but just following up on what Councillor Brown said, there was a suggestion in here, well, I think you put it to government, Mr Mayor, to put on hold those recent property valuations. And for those ratepayers in Wainuiomata and Nainai and other places, that was actually the most significant portion of their rates increase. So I think that perhaps if there's any ratepayers out there, they should be lobbying their local MPs to see if that change can be made at a governmental level. The other comment I had was about the comms around this, and it's on page 15. There's discussion of some of the barriers to communicating any kind of change in consultation at this particular time during the lockdown period, and how a lot of it will have to be done online. This current situation has really brought some quite sharp attention to the digital divide in some of our communities and between certain demographics in our communities. I noticed over the page it talked about the 2-week engagement progressing after a meeting in May. So just a comment really that we should be trying to do whatever we can to use non-digital means to communicate with people in our communities, and hopefully, fingers crossed, by May we won't be in lockdown anymore, so those options will be much more available to us.
If I can comment on that, Mr. Mayor, we will predominantly focus on an online and telephone type survey. So, but we do have, I think Councillor Mitchell, you asked last week, do we have any metrics upon which we can get better at? So, for example, in a recent rubbish and recycling survey, just shy of 3,800 residents responded. Only 1% of those were on paper. Others were via Bang the Table Facebook. Last year on your annual plan, I've had a look, you had 2,900 visits to the digital engagement platform Bang the Table. And it was the first time that was used. So I think this time we will try and promote that a lot more through those channels like Neighbourly. 670 of those 2,900 visits were on Facebook on a mobile phone. So we'll do that. And obviously, as we see what happens over the coming weeks, we'll look to see what we can do to enhance any other means. I think the big thing we can do also is to use connectors, you know, so to use the older people's homes, the Grey Powers, the Youth Council, community groups, the Rinanga, the Marae, all of those places as connectors to get the message out themselves. And we'll probably need to look at radio as well, I think.
Cool. No, thank you. I think Councillor Briggs may have actually had his hand up first, virtual hand. So I'll go Councillor Briggs, then Councillor Dyer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question to the officers regards some of the commentary that's been going on in the community around a potential zero rates increase. There was some brief mention of it today in the public comment as well. And what I'm keen to hear from yourselves is what would that actually mean in practical terms for our council if we were to have a zero rates increase? What would the noticings be in the community? What services would be removed? What job losses would it look like across the council as well?
I can start on that, Mr. Mayor. Jenny may wish to come in. So I've already said to you that there's a significant portion of our income that's going to be at risk anyway. For example, already this year, I want to add some further context because it's not just about that 3.8%. We set an unbalanced budget last year, and then the money coming in was less than you budgeted for. We know this year that the budget you set, because of COVID-19, we're not going to meet the money coming in terms of the income, for example, from parking and leisure and all those things. Plus, we've had to spend more money, but on both the emergency response and bringing some of the IT forward. So we're going to go into next year not confident about the growth in our rating base, not confident in our money, but what we're not doing is adding all that onto the rates bill. We're going to have to consume some of that smoke. On top of that, we've already built in a definite 1 million in savings, plus a further, I think I've said it to you before, it probably gets it closer to 2 million when we need to begin to think about the capacity the council needs to change. So if you were to do, I've looked at, you know, crudely, we haven't put this in there in terms of the specifics because you kind of don't want to scare people unnecessarily, especially at times when perhaps everybody's feeling, you know, vulnerable. But I said to you that if we saved $1 million on staffing, that's 15 jobs we can protect. So if we had to take another 4 million out of the budget on top of that, then that's 60 jobs. We have 498 staff. It's probably 2 libraries. It's probably one leisure centre. It would certainly mean that we would have to look at a cut across all of our service levels. Actually, at a time, for example, when, believe it or not, things like building consents and limbs are not reduced at all at this time. But crudely, that's what you'd be looking at. There isn't staffing makes up 38 million of our operating budget. The rest is through contracts and buildings. So for sure, there's some efficiencies, but I'm not going to lie to anybody. There isn't $6 million worth of no pain, take the money out. There just isn't.
Thank you.
Councillor Dyer.
Thanks. Just had a question regarding the page 71, where it's got the breakdown of the suburbs. and what the different rate increases would mean to the individual suburbs. I'm presuming these figures are excluding any rate differential freezing that we might potentially make after consulting. So these numbers, if that did go ahead, these numbers would be a bit softer.
No, we've assumed here that the rates differential changes have been baked in. So we're assuming we got that
Okay.
across the line. So that's after adjusting for the rates differential freeze.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other questions, Councillor Briggs?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the Mayor said earlier, this is potentially putting a pause on our intended plans for the city. In future years, if we were to unpause and get to it, would there be a significant rates increase to catch up to the shortfall that we're now potentially postponing as well?
Should I answer? I think through the next LTP process, we've got an opportunity to really think about how we smooth future rates increases. I think we need to do more work in that. So, I mean, and there's a lot of uncertainty around the Three Waters piece. I'm not sure what that means for us right now. And also the impact of COVID-19, what that means for rates increases. So, you know, it's difficult to say now, but I think we will need to try and, you know, think long term and try and smooth the rating impact for our ratepayers and make sure that we've got good, strong policies in terms of rates relief to help people that are in need. And maybe, you know, there may be future changes that we make to our policies to support people in the right areas.
Thank you.
Here, Councillor Brown.
I know it's mainly related to central government, but for Wainuiomata, 10% of the rates was for under the revaluation. Is there a way we can look at, my comment would be, who knows what the next 12 months are going to be like, especially housing, and we're about to have those revaluations that are a massive jump in Wainuiomata. Is there any way that we can look at how the proposed central government revaluations, and if it was, what would that look like?
So I suppose that does require a legislative change to implement a delay in the revaluation implementation. You know, we've seen central government be really responsive and do a whole lot of things in a short 2-week period. So, you know, I think there's the lobbying's happening. And so, you know, we just need to wait and see. I'm not sure whether it'll get across the line or not, but we can only work within the legislative environment that we've got and make sure that we've got rates relief policies in the right places. And, you know, the rates postponement policy, we did say we'd come back in 3 to 6 months with a review. So, you know, I think there's opportunities there to try and target our help and support in like that.
Hey, thank you. Is there any other questions, particularly those who haven't asked a question? No? Okay, any further comments, Joe or Jenny?
No, I think we've said what needs to be said, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll move through to the recommendations. Catherine, would you be able to bring those up, please? Okay, no, thank you. Now, Councillor Dyer, I did see an email come through around, did you have an amendment or anything that was it with this, or was that another paper?
That was the previous paper around the policy. It was just around declaring an event, but I'm happy for the subcommittee to work through that.
Okay. No, great. Sorry about that. I just caught my eye just before. So, okay, so we've got the recommendations in front of us, and what I am recommending is that we go with option 2, and I would like to move that. So do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Dyer, thank you. Catherine can probably go back to the screen if you. Is everyone happy that they've read that, they've got it in front of them? Okay, no, thank you. So for me, this certainly it's a difficult time for all of us, and particularly out there for our community and for our people and for our business. And even 2 weeks ago, as we knew we were heading into this lockdown period, I don't think we could quite understand the significant impact that it's going to have on us as a country and the international community as well. So I just want to again acknowledge the officers for working at pace over the past week. Thank you to the chairs of committee who I had a discussion with, who I've been speaking with on this as well. And I think that we've reached a good balance point here to make sure that we're acknowledging that it isn't business as usual. We do need to lower that rates increase burden on our people, but also making sure that we continue with through next year some of those important projects. And it's good to see that there will continue to be budget amounts in there for them. So this isn't a case of cancelling any particular project or anything like that. It's a case of saying pause. That gives us the time to understand the environment that we'll be going into over the next 3, 6, 12 months, what the capacity of the construction industry looks like, and also gives us an opportunity to put our best foot forward with central government around shovel-ready projects. And I know already we're doing a significant amount of work there to make sure we put in a really good pitch to see what support can be provided. Now, for me, while I think politically anything where you can say a zero rates increase is going to sound attractive, it actually is a race to the bottom in my view, and particularly for councils across the country. There may be some councils who have specific reasons why they are able to consider that. We know in Bay of Plenty Regional Council, they've already outlined the cash reserves that they have to be able to take that type of hit. We are not in that situation here in Lower Hutt. We know the budget, unbalanced budget that already exists and the deficit that we were trying to tackle with the original rates increase that was proposed. We have a significant amount of pressures that we need to deal to over the coming 12 months and beyond, and we will. But like I said, we can push that out a little bit further. But my biggest concern really is the race to the bottom with a 0% increase or rates holiday freezes, is that we actually do the opposite to what government is trying to desperately do and stimulate our local economy. And also what it would mean potentially is staff being laid off and community facilities closing. And I can tell you now that if we're going to have more pain in our community, those community facilities and those services are going to be more important than ever. So for me, that is just absolutely not an option that we can consider, given the pain that we would potentially put further on our communities. And I think it would potentially be popular and so forth, but it would create those perverse outcomes over the medium and long term. And we would be finding ourselves in a very difficult position in 12 months' time. We already are going to be in a difficult position, let's be honest about that, and dealing with some of these issues that we've been talking about over the last 6 months. So I think we are taking a prudent approach here. We're acknowledging that we can't continue and bulldoze through with our original plans that were set back in February, but finding that balance so we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I'm happy to open it up for any other comments from councillors. Councillor Dyer.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll also be supporting the motion. I think it's a really good middle ground between our intentions of what we wanted to do 6 months ago when we first all got together and the reality that we're now in. You're completely correct that council does have a huge role to play once we come out the other end of the wake of COVID-19. Even if we were to go with the zero rate increase, there's still going to be increases in some communities who will face large increases just from the RVs alone. Even with a 3.8% increase, there'll be some suburbs who actually see a reduction in their rates. The way to tackle the people that are actually struggling is that we need to focus our attention on the rate postponement policy, and that really targets the ones that actually need help. They're the ones that are actually losing their jobs, have actually had 80% wage reductions. And also I'm really aware that with this option, it takes away the legal requirement for us to consult. We still can consult on the voluntary basis, but without having the legal weight on our shoulders of having to do it a certain way to tick a certain threshold, I think will allow us to still engage in a really meaningful way, but take away some of that pressure.
Thank you, Councillor Dyer. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mayor Barry. I will be supporting the preferred option as well.
I think as governance, we set what needs to happen, and I'm really confident that the officers get on and do the how it will be done. But in this environment, we're in a place of absolute a pandemic, and we really don't know what the next 3, 6 or 12 months is going to bring us. We've got some ideas what the needs and gaps are right now, but I'm sure there's going to be some other strong needs that are going to come out that we don't even know about yet. We didn't even know this was going to happen 2 months ago. So there needs to be that opportunity to respond to those needs and gaps. And in a time of such hardship, we get those opportunities as well. We've got really strong communities that can come up with opportunities, and we need to be placed to support the opportunities to help towards the hardships. So they are my key reasons. My only addition is that I have concerns about what the housing market looks like now and in the future, and that government may apply those valuations. 6 months' time, they may be completely different, and they've had a big jump based on that. So central government discussion, but I'll be supporting this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Edwards, then Councillor Milne.
Yeah, thank you. I won't repeat to any great extent what's already been said. I agree with Councillor Dyer in particular. This is the responsible course, and to deal with those people who are going to be facing financial hardship, we have better tools, and that we should be looking at. Personally, I'd be a little bit wary of this talk of. I know we've asked the government to look at freezing valuations, but there's some risks with that down the track. Where you could be landing residential ratepayers with a really, really, really big hit, because it's quite feasible that commercial valuations with some businesses closing, and as people maybe look closer at working from home as a result of this, commercial valuations could go down considerably. And personally, I don't see there being much less pressure or much less housing demand. So yeah, I'd be a little bit wary of relying on the evaluation freeze.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. I think it's a really good point. Councillor Milne.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to propose an amendment to the recommendation of option 2, and I'd seek a seconder and speak to that at the right moment.
What is your amendment, Councillor?
My amendment is here. I've shared my screen. Can anybody see that?
No, I don't think you have the ability to share your screen, Councillor. So,
Are you still looking at me? Are you not my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So the amendment is that officers undertake work and report back to council on the measures necessary in order to achieve a 0% rates increase for the coming financial year.
I'll second that, Chris.
Okay, I'll open the discussion.
So I'll speak to that first, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
You can speak to the amendment, yes.
Yes, thank you. So the times we face now are unprecedented in our lifetimes, and I think we can say with some degree of certainty that total household income in the Hutt Valley will be down in the coming year. The pain of the crisis we're now facing falls unevenly on the community. It falls principally on certain sectors of the business community, but in reality, the whole business community is quite severely affected. Hospitality and retail more so than most, but in fact, nearly all businesses in the Hutt Valley are shut down currently and facing extreme difficulties. Of course, businesses are nothing more than the people who are employed by them, and so that cascades down into the community. And so the 3.8% figure that's been put up with as a so-called middle ground figure, at this point, there's no particular science behind that figure. So what I'm asking officers to do is to report back to us on what it would take for us to come back with a 0% rates increase. I note that there are 12 councils in New Zealand who have already declared that they're going to be doing that. The situation around an LTP amendment is unclear. I know that Christchurch City Council are proposing a 0% rates increase with no LTP amendment, and the potential cuts highlighted by the chief executive in order to achieve this were all around staff, and I mean it is a that's one way that it could be done. There are lots of different ways it could be done, but I know that if officers were asked to go and have a look and had the time to have a look, they may well come back and surprise us with some of the things they come up with. I'll just point out that, since 2004, the average residential ratepayer in the Hutt Valley has had their rates increased by 3 times the rate of inflation. And at 3.8%, even that apparently modest rates increase is still twice the rate of inflation, at a time when most people probably will not be getting pay rises and in fact may well be suffering a loss in household income. And so that 3.8% is a significant extra impost on families. And we've spent quite a lot of time today talking about rates relief and rates postponement and so on. Well, the greatest thing we could do is actually take less out of households during this year. And that may mean pausing some things. We talked about Nānai Pool, and I know that it's now become a source of some amusement amongst some councillors that I keep raising the fact that we have never consulted the public on the fact that there'll be at least a $2.5 million annual operating loss. This would be a good time to do that, to see what answer they come back with in terms of the pool. So I think back to when we were recruiting our new CEO, and when we were recruiting her, she talked about her experience at Doncaster and how she had to manage Doncaster through a very tough period in its history. And in fact, if my recollection is correct, she managed to achieve a 30% efficiency, a 30% reduction at Doncaster. Now, as far as I know, Doncaster is still there, and it's still a great place to live. In fact, it's prospering. So I must say we never realised that we would need the new chief executive skills so soon, but we hired her because we knew she had the capacity to do this. We knew that she was capable of conducting thorough analysis, making really good choices, and putting those up to us. I must admit, I didn't expect this to be necessary so soon, but I mean, we know that the chief executive has the skills to do this, and the point's been very well made that as governors, we should set the parameters, and I believe we should be setting the chief executive a challenge, and that it should be reported back to us. Now, what happens once it's reported back to us is the next step. But I put it to you that we owe it to our ratepayers to actually go through this process, have that report back, and then we can decide how we deal with that. So I think the starting point here is that we recognise that this council should not be increasing its impost on ratepayers at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. Catherine, can we please have the report, the recommendations pulled up so we can exactly understand what Councillor Milne has proposed as an amendment?
I just need Councillor Milne to repeat the amendment for me, please.
I'm sorry, am I muted, am I?
Yeah, you're good now, yeah.
Okay. That officers undertake work and report back on the measures necessary to achieve a 0% rates increase for the 2020 to 21 financial year. Now, that I guess is an amendment to the option 2, and I have just pasted it. I'm just pasting it into the chat so that everybody can see it. So it's now in the chat.
Okay, so Councillor Milne, I just need to clarify, are you proposing that option come alongside a 3.8% prepared budget that we consider, or are you suggesting that as an alternative?
I'm suggesting that be substituted.
Okay, well, that's a direct negative to what?
Well, I'm suggesting that the 3.8% be reduced. The 3.8% be reduced. I'm suggesting That's a
Councillor,
3.8.
Councillor, let me speak. That is a direct negative. So you are certainly most welcome to put a consequential motion if this motion fails to propose option 3, and I'm more than happy to propose that. I'm sorry, but my understanding of what I thought you were suggesting was that a 0% budget be options be considered and presented to us alongside 3.8. So
I'm suggesting that we amend the 3.8 to 0 and ask officers to do work as to how that could be achieved. But my amendment is to the 3.8 figure.
Yeah, well,
it's not a direct negative. It's an amendment.
I am ruling that as a direct negative because that is the other option. And if this option fails of 3.8, if this does not pass, then I certainly would encourage you to move. We would then call on a new motion to be moved. Okay, so the amendment doesn't stand, so we continue with the substantive item. Councillor Milne, I'm happy for you to continue on that substantive item if you wish to speak, noting that you've already made a number of comments. Around
I'm just unclear as to why it can't be treated as an amendment to be voted on.
My ruling is that it's a direct negative, understanding orders. So as normal process, as you should understand as an experienced councillor, would be that if this motion fails, which I have moved, you then can put your motion about officers preparing a 0% budget. It is not an amendment. This is a substantive change to what is being proposed here. And it's like I say, it's a direct negative. So we'll be moving on. Do you wish to speak on this now?
I will add a couple more words. Just to recap on the 3 times consumer price index increases that residential ratepayers have paid since 2004 each and every year, I would point out that the 7.9% rates increase that was proposed would have added $188 million of extra revenue to council over 20 years. Now, considering that Nainai Pool is the largest single project ever in the history of the city at around $52 million, I cannot see how that 7.9% could be justified to bring in an extra $188 million for an asset that's going to last an awful lot longer than 20 years. So I'm very concerned that even the 3.8% figure, twice CPI, builds in a significant amount of revenue without us going back and having the opportunity to consider a more zero-based approach. And we're only asking for officers to come back to us, to report back to us before we set the rate for the coming year. Because the 3.8% motion that you've put up does not require officers to look for further additional savings. It's a figure pretty much plucked out of mid-air and contains a lot of new spending. For example, it does contain the living wage. It does contain an extra $400,000 for communications outreach from this council, as I understand it, and other extra expenditure. And I think that we ought to be asking officers to come back and have a look at how that can be reduced further, which was the intention of my motion, which you have ruled out of order.
Yeah, Councillor Milne, I think I take a bit of exception to some of those comments, particularly around the 3.8 number being plucked out of thin air. As you are aware, that is going back to what the LTP listed, which was 2.8%, and the Chief Executive has already commented to us that the expectation of 1% growth may be a bit high given our circumstances and the uncertainty that exists. So the 3.8 number is a conservative number to cover that. Now, the budget will be prepared. That information will come back to us of what is in, what is out in later May for us to consider. And then that is what we are deciding here today. We are not signing off a budget. We're asking the officers to go to work within those parameters. And I suspect the number of those items you've suggested actually won't be in there. So because we won't have the funding to be able to do that. So we'll now continue on with this motion that's before us. So other councillors who haven't spoken yet on this. Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge yourself and your chairs for the work that you've done in the last 2 weeks and the significant amount of hours that officers have put in to be adaptable, to be agile, and be able to provide us with some information for our meeting today. None of us as elected members are tone deaf to our community and to the changing nature of our context. And that is why I think this is the right move for us to be doing. It's a conservative move and it's the right move for our community's well-being. I'll be supporting the motions to pause and acknowledging that some projects won't be able to continue as we intended only 3 or 6 months ago. So it's the right move at this point in time, so I'm happily in support.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Briggs. Councillor Rashid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our economy has changed significantly and we don't know the full impact of it yet. So we must support vulnerable households and businesses to mitigate the impact of this severe shock in any way we can. And we as a council must be looking at easing the financial burden in times like this. This is such a stressful time for most. Unemployment will rise and it's inevitable. So looking at the businesses that are closed, wage subsidy helps, but all the other bills that has to be delayed doesn't go away. So it gets added on to when they open. So the cost is going to double for most businesses and revenue will reduce to most. So many of the ratepayers will be losing jobs or going to reduced hours. So I do not believe it's fair our ratepayers have to pay more in rates at a time they're struggling to pay for their day-to-day expenses. So there's so much uncertainty for our ratepayers, so I cannot support a rate increase in this economic climate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rashid. Councillor Bassett, then Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I first of all thank the staff, particularly Joe and Jenny in particular for the work that she's done. I know she spent many, many hours, and I thank her for all that and the team behind you. I've got to say, Mr. Mayor, I'm disappointed that you haven't accepted the amendment from Councillor Milne. But I will be voting against this because I think Councillor Milne's proposal is a sound one for all of us to be able to then digest the system in terms of a 3.8 as potentially a zero increase in rates, or even potentially something in between after the Chief Executive has done some more work on it. So I will be voting against it, but I will hopefully other councils will be sufficiently to enable Councillor Milne's motion to be put. I would like to say that when I raised these issues on the 18th of March, I felt that there wasn't a great deal of interest to do anything about this, but I'm absolutely delighted that we are actually seriously having this conversation because it is a real issue. We are in very difficult times, and it's just not only the business community, but it's also our residents as well. And I've heard it talk today, we've got new homeowners and younger people that are going to find it difficult, but it's also difficult for our more mature people as well. Those on fixed incomes are really very worried about the potential of rates increases. Why I have a preference for Councillor Milne's motion, because A, it's going to allow us a bit more time and obviously to get a bit more information. But you yourself, Mr. Mayor, have talked about the stimulus packages that government is putting in. You talked about our potential application for the 9i pool. You've talked about cycleways. And I'm well aware that there's a lot of work being done around the three waters and potentially for government to come in with some very, very significant money, which will stimulate this economy. So therefore, I think at the moment, the time is now that these people want help and support. And the best way for us to do that is actually to cut our cloth So I will be voting against this, and I will be supporting, if in fact this council declines or does not proceed with this resolution, I will be certainly supporting Councillor Milnes. And I don't think there will be any hardship in relation to that, because I think it's just going to give us more time to think about it. We're not making a final decision today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bassett. Clarification, we're not making a final decision today.
That's what I said.
So
that's exactly what I said. Not making a final decision today. That's why I think let's have a look at the other option.
Well, the other option does not make a final decision today. It's the parameters that we are setting for a budget to be prepared. So
I understand.
I appreciate
I understand.
it. Okay. Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, everybody. The conversation and the input has been fantastic today. And as many councillors have said, our staff have been just working wonderfully, and the input that they have provided, the information, and all the research that's gone on to get us to this stage has been wonderful. The steps we are taking are just the beginning of this journey. We all know it's going to be challenging. We haven't been here before. Today is an extraordinary meeting for an extraordinary time. So I really believe the leaders of this council and of our country, we are working together on solutions that are going to bring us through this together. And it is about bringing everybody through. There are people that are going to come out different on the other side. Some mightn't come through, as we've heard as well. There's businesses that will be failing. But we have to support everybody, and we're doing our best to do that. And I think the option of 3.8 going out for no consultation, putting that in the plan is the way to go. So I'll be supporting it.
Thank you. I know this is an important item, so does any other councillor wish to speak? No? Okay. Councillor Mitchell.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I spoke at the beginning of this meeting today about how some people will have very reduced abilities to pay their rates and other costs in their lives as a result of COVID-19, and I'm really pleased with what we've been able to do to offer support to those people and direct support with their rates payments in particular. In terms of the draft annual plan, this particular motion, there seems to be a bit of a stalemate between some councillors, and there is a recommendation there to progress a draft annual plan with a rates revenue increase of 3.8, but also to consider any other further guidance to officers as the draft annual plan is being developed. And I would expect that when we come back to look at this in May and June, that we take a good look at the budget that is before us anyway. So I'd certainly be open to the budget being set at 3.8, but officers also providing some information about how it may be able to be reduced further. I think that's what you were suggesting, Mr. Mayor, that Councillor Milne. I also first understood Councillor Milne's request to be something that would sit alongside this 3.8% budget, not replace it. So I'm happy to support the resolution as it's proposed, but would also be happy to ask that officers provide further information about what other cuts may be possible to reduce the rates burden further without kind of committing to them and without knowing what they are.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mitchell. And you're touching on what I was going to respond with, is that I had no problem with Councillor Milne's motion when I first understood it to be an addition, so officers would come back with what a 0% budget means. I think that is fair to have that on the table. However, what Councillor Milne proposed was for 3.8% to come off the table and for a 0% budget to be proposed. That is very different, and that's why it hasn't been ruled in. What I am more than happy, if the council agrees, is for an understanding of what a 0% budget would mean to come back, but the parameters we are setting, and to be very clear, because we need the officers to focus on on the direction that we give, is 3.8. So that is what they are focusing on. Beyond that, we can then understand what a 0% budget would mean. And I think that is fair enough to have that presented. So if there's agreement with that approach, and that is captured within the recommendations that are currently there, then do I have agreement on that? Councillor Hislop.
thank you, Mr. Mayor, for those comments, because they were very similar to what I was going to say. I'm one of the chairs that's been working hard with you and with the officers in the last fortnight. And certainly that is the understanding that I have around how this process is going to work. And I think that we've been talking and taking a lot of care to make sure that we try and strike a balance that is not going to put we are going to allow people who are in financial difficulties options to help with their rates payments and so on by the postponement method. But we have to be careful not to completely put the brakes on our moving forward, because when we do come through this very difficult time that the world has never seen before, we have to ensure that we're able to have projects and things that are going to stimulate job opportunities for our residents as well. And so we sort of have to strike that balance, I think. And my understanding of sort of taking that middle ground was that that would be where we could potentially go. But certainly I do agree that we want to see other options from the officers for every little thing that we can do to help, save as much as we can. But we can't, I guess what we can't do is move the problem on to, further into the future, so that we are never going to see ourselves coming clear of this. I think we have to strike that balance, and hopefully that's what we'll be able to do.
Thank you, Councillor Hislop. And with that further clarity for those councillors who have spoken, does that provide some comfort of what you were wanting to come back? I just want to understand that. So if I'm happy to get that feedback from councillors.
Well, Mr. Mayor, if you're proposing that my resolution sit alongside as a request for information to enable us to have a debate in the future about a 0% rise with the information to hand, I would be prepared to support that.
Yeah, well, that was what I thought you had originally suggested, which I actually was quite comfortable with, not swapping out, as I said, a direct negative. So I'm comfortable for that on the basis that officers are giving the clear direction to prepare a budget in the 3.8%. That is the clear direction we're giving, but we need to understand what a 0% budget would mean, which if we were minded to then go further down that path, there's the opportunity to do that. But
well, there may be an option to pick and choose from a menu to reduce the increase below 3.8.
Yep. Okay, so we'll have that alongside as a minute. Can we bring the screen up, Catherine? Just to make sure everyone's aware of what they're voting on.
It's coming. Sorry.
Just a quick question while we wait. We've been told that if we do go with the zero-based budget, we'd need to do extensive consultation. If we do ask for these figures to be brought alongside the 3.8, and then we do decide in May to go with the 0%, have we jumped the gun there a bit, or is that fine come that time?
Well, I think the advice we've already got, and that's why I want officers to focus on something that's actually realistic, because if it's triggering an LTP amendment, and I know that Wellington are in the same boat, and it's different from each council. Some councils may be able to do it without triggering an LTP amendment, depending on their circumstances. So, I mean, I think that alone is a big barrier, but it's fair enough for that information to come back. So there's no problem with that. Joe, would you like to comment on that? Is that doable for officers?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I think the important thing is that we're given a steer by members. At the moment, there is a set of decisions from council, and our job is to implement what you ask us for. And the current set of decisions is to go out at 7.9. We're reporting back to you today saying we don't think that's a good idea anymore, having had the discussions with you and your chairs and the rest of the councillors. That's why we're proposing this middle ground. We do need a steer to produce a detailed budget. It is possible for us to come back, and of course we won't leave any stone unturned in terms of reducing costs. But in terms of zero, we can come back with the information, and you will need to sufficient information, not just the cost base, but what that means, for example, about consultation, about and what that might mean about when you are able to set a rate, because you may not be able to set it in time for the 1st of July, which will clearly then also have implications themselves in terms of finance. But there's no reason why I can't come back with all of that. That my big plea to governors is please give us a steer about the actual basis you want the budget to be predicated upon.
Okay, so I'm certainly proposing that the budget be prepared on a 3.8% number, but with additional information to be provided around council understanding what a 0% budget would mean. Is that clear enough, Joe?
Yes.
Yep. No, thank you. Okay, so is there anyone else? So we've got some clarity there. Anyone else who hasn't spoken wishing to speak?
Mr. Mayor, and before you put the vote, I'll just call for a division as well on this. It's a significant issue, and I think it's an important thing to do.
Okay. Okay, no, thank you. So I'll move the, actually, before I do actually have some comments that I did want to touch on in response. So I know I have been feeding back a bit.
Mr. Mayor, Matt, before you do that.
No, I'm going to speak first. So I just wanted to touch on the point that's been made around using rate increases as a way to provide rates relief for people. And it's actually incredibly disappointing. And sadly, I think this is a narrative that's been picked up by organisations like the Taxpayer Union, who have been pushing for 0 rate increases for a very long time, and actually pushing that, peddling that in the current crisis. And while it may sound politically popular, it certainly does. We know that the unintended consequences may be massive depending on where your council is at. So I just really wanted to reinforce that. So, and that's why it's important we give the clear steer to officers to provide something that is balanced and more realistic, so we are best placed when we get through this to help with the economic and social recovery for all of our people. And there is no way in heck that I would propose a budget that does the opposite, even though it may be politically popular with some. So I just want to also reinforce that we are asking officers to tighten their belts here, and they are looking at spending right across the board. And I think it's clear that the Chief Executive has given that commitment. And let's not forget that before all of this, we were trying to tackle up to $17 million unbalanced budget. So while you may think that, oh, well, we could save money here, that unbalanced budget just gets larger, and it's a bigger problem for us to solve in later years to come or over the next 12 months. So I just really want to reinforce those points that, again, while it may sound popular, it may get some votes, it is not in the best interest of our city to go down that path. However, totally understand that information is fair enough to come to the table for councillors to look at. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Mr. Mayor.
Aye.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, by division.
Division.
Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
A point of order, Mr. Mayor.
What's your point? What's point of order, Councillor?
Well, the writing in red that's up there on the screen isn't actually what is quite different from what I had proposed to be included, to sit alongside.
Well, I'm making it clear that we are proposing, we are asking officers to focus on a 3.8% based budget, yes. But for an understanding of what a 0% budget would mean, I think that captures.
So can I suggest what I think it ought to say in red? That it asks officers to come back with an analysis of what expenditure reductions would be required in order to achieve a 0% rates increase. with an analysis of what expenditure reductions would be required in order to achieve a 0% rates increase.
Well, this again is.
Sorry, point of order, Mr. Mayor. You've put the motion. It's time to vote. All amendments have already been tabled, and the councillor's coming in now to change something that we've already moved to this point. So, point of order, if you would make a ruling, please.
Well, those words were never put by any councillor. They came out of officers.
And it hasn't been put either.
I'm adding that as an additional motion. So ask officers as an additional to come back with an understanding of what a 0% budget means to council, and that be reported back. And if council is of a mind to not go down a 3.8 or movement on that and go down a 0, then we will need to go back to the drawing board again. But I'm clearly the officers need a steer of what they need to focus on, and I'm not willing for them to focus all of the energy on time also on preparing an alternative budget. So we need to give a clear steer here, and if you don't support that, you can vote against the motion. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
By division, Mr. Mayor.
Division called. So Joe, is that your responsibility still?
It is. I'm
an aye.
I'll call out the names if I may, Mr. Mayor. Starting with you, Mayor Barry.
Aye.
Councillor Bassett.
No.
Councillor Briggs.
Aye.
Councillor Brown. Councillor Brown.
Aye.
Councillor Dyer.
Aye.
Councillor Edwards.
Aye.
Councillor Lewis. Sorry, Deputy
Aye.
Mayor Lewis. Councillor
Aye.
Hislop.
Aye.
Councillor Sutton.
Microphone.
Councillor Sutton. I'll do the rest and come back to Councillor Sutton. Okay.
No.
Councillor Rashid.
No.
Councillor Milne.
Against.
Councillor Mitchell.
Aye.
That motion is carried. 8 votes for, 4 against.
Cool, thank you, and thank you to everyone for that. And it was a really good, robust discussion and debate on that, and I really do appreciate everyone's contribution. So we'll move into item number 9. We've got Wendy here to speak to the report. Wendy, if you're able to give an overview, and then we'll go into questions.
Hello, everyone. Okay, I'll just get my notes out here. So Council decided that on the 24th of March that they would establish a community resilience fund, and the policy has been developed so that the purpose of the fund can be established and a decision-making process can be agreed to that provides good governance and oversight, plus accountability for the funds that are actually dispersed to the community. I think that the policy is pretty self-explanatory in the sense that you've already discussed it previously and what you were wanting to achieve from it. Just one note, in paragraph 5G, that is actually incorrect. When I was developing the policy, I did have that section in that priority will be given to different groups. But on reflection and in discussion with other officers, we felt that that criteria perhaps shouldn't apply here because it might limit choices that were made and that would be inappropriate for the times currently. So we wanted people to be able to apply for that without too many restrictions. the legal entity issue, we have got NGOs and registered charities there. However, we feel the criteria is sufficient to enable an established community organisation that may not have gone through those legal processes to establish themselves as a registered charity or indeed be an NGO, so that they can in fact also apply for the fund. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Wendy. Is there any questions from councillors? No questions. Okay. No, thank you, Wendy. So we'll just move into the recommendations here. So Catherine, if you could bring them up on the screen. Okay. No, thank you. So just noting the comments and public comment from Terry Hughes around obviously civil defence staff access to this fund and so forth. Wendy, actually may be a question for you. Apologies, around whether that could be incorporated in. I don't know if you had a chance to see that submission.
No, sorry, I haven't had an opportunity to look at that, but I think the criteria would enable that as it is. I think it would be good for me to have a look at that submission and then give advice about the fund.
So if it's helpful, so his comment was, with the $2,000 grant, I'd like to see this expanded to organisations such as civil defence teams that have had to purchase previously unneeded PPE gear to allow them to operate safely in the event of an emergency.
And they're not able to, I mean, I don't understand whether or not they're able to access that through the Ministry of Health, who are currently trying to make sure that volunteers in those types of positions do get access to PPE gear. So I think it would be important to check that first, too, to see if we could speed that up or if we could make it possible for them to get it through the government or Ministry of Health.
So my checking, though, the criteria, so if they couldn't, then they would be eligible through this fund.
Yes, I would think so.
But I would imagine, I think you're right, I think Ministry of Health or others would be supporting with things like that.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, I think that clears it up. Okay, no, thank you. So we've got the motions on the screen. I'll move the motions there. Do I have a seconder? So I can't see everyone at the moment, so.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. And I'm happy, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, the fund. It's an ability for us to have some money there for community groups or organisations who are in need, given the COVID-19 situation. And yeah, I think it's something that, again, thank you for the officers for preparing on a pretty short-term basis. But I'll open up if there's any other comments. Councillor Dyer.
Yes, I just wanted to say exactly what you just finished there with Mayor Barry. Just thanking you and Bradley and Joe for your work you've done on this in such a short amount of time. It's really great. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Catherine. If we could pull the motion off the screen, if that's okay. Thank you. Excellent. Cool. Okay. Is there any other comments? Debate? No. Okay. I'll move the motions. All those in favour say aye.
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 Those against, no. I declare that carried. Thank you very much. Okay, I think that's that is all of us. I've received no questions. Just before I close, I was meant to mention this in my mayoral statement and it escaped me. was just acknowledging the passing of Matt Ryland, obviously Naomi Shaw, Councillor Shaw's partner, who passed away quite tragically. I think it was a week or so ago now, and I've been in touch with Councillor Shaw and just again, as I mentioned earlier, told her that she can take all the time that she needs. But I think it's important that we just formally, acknowledge Matt's passing and our support and sympathies to Naomi and the whole family. So we'll just put that as part of the record. Thank you. And just with the closing karakia, Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mi noi tātou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. He hiakana te atakura, he teo, he hoka, he hauhu, tihei, mauri ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Briggs, and thanks to all councillors. I think this has actually worked quite well, I've got to say. It's actually a lot better than what I thought maybe would go. So thank you for all of that and for your efforts and for sticking in your bubbles as well. So thanks everyone, and we'll be in touch soon. And thank you to all the members of the public listening in as well. I declare the meeting closed at 4:45.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks.